Shalom, shalom. Before I get started, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rachak, Wadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule and teach well. And also peace and safety to the Akim that spread across the four corners of the world. That's pushing out this truth with all diligence and putting their lives on the line to do so. I'm the brother Karan out here out of Great Millstone, Atlanta. Here again with the lesson. As you can see, the news article on the, your screen. It's from the Washington Post. It says, as National Guard's troops arrive, uncertainty over command of D.C. police. The National Guard began deploying on D.C. streets Tuesday night. And if you've been, paying attention to what's going on in the news and the media, Trump basically mandated, issued a mandate in D.C. to basically get rid, of the homeless people, in which, it calls for, them to bring the National Guards there, because of protests or whatever the case may be, but, this really goes to show you, and, as I read the article, you will see, what, prompted this statement that I'm about to make, but this really goes to show you, the true horns, of Esau. Because even, when you read the scriptures, it was a certain level of, well, not even a certain level, but even, when we, how you deal with the homeless people, it was a level of righteousness with it, but Esau, look at how the conditions of, the homeless people is in his kingdom, which they could be used, to basically benefit him, but instead they just let them linger on the streets. They provide them with drugs and, all other sorts of madness, man. All right. And now, you want to try to clean it up, when you basically caused the mess, So it says National Guard troops have begun deploying on the streets of the nation's capital, with Humvees and troops spotted along the National Mall. It says a day after the President Donald Trump federalized the local police department and issued officers a far-reaching mandate to do whatever the hell they want to curb crime. You see? And that's the statement, that, prompted me to say, Esau is about to really start showing his true colors. Start showing himself for the devil that he is, man. All right. Remember the scripture said, Isaiah 47 to uncover the thigh, so he won't be able to hide himself, much longer, and and it's really showing. All right. So it says, yet it remained unclear what directives, if any, D.C. police will receive from their new federal manager. It says district officials said they were still in command of the department, operating as usual, having received no new orders from Trump administration. The city police chief, Pamela A. Smith, has been supplying ideas about how federal law enforcement could be used by D.C. It says not the other way around, according to a D.C. official who spoke on the condition of anonymity, if I'm pronouncing that right, but it says to describe sensitive ongoing talks. All right, so this is a very, tricky situation, and with how Esau is about to play on this. All right. But nevertheless, prophecy tells us, which I have pulled up here, In fact, let me read that in Revelation 13 and 11. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. You see? So those 2 horns basically represents the 2 parties, of the office, the Democrat and the Republicans. And it says, and he spake as a dragon. Let's look into that word dragon here. It's G1404, Draconian. It says a dragon, a great serpent, a name of Satan, dragon. It says in the Strong's definition, matter of fact, so I can. Yeah. So basically, it's going into the draconian measures. And if you look that word up, let's look it. It says 1759 draconian as the adjective. It says of or pertaining to Draco, the ancient Greek statesman, 1777, in reference to laws rigorous, extremely severe, or harsh. You see, and that's basically the statement that Trump made. By saying, "Hey, do whatever the hell you want," to get rid of them, man. Because he doesn't care. They all, everybody is really, outside of the elites, of America. Everybody else can be considered casualties of war. In which we are in a time of war, man. It says Draco is the Latinized form of Greek Dracon. You see, going to Revelation, the 13th chapter. And the 11th verse is literally exactly what I just read. It says Draco is the Latinized form of Greek Dracon, name of the Archon of Athens, who laid down a code of laws for Athens in 621 BCE that mandated death as punishment for minor crimes. His name seems to mean literally sharp-sighted. You see? And that spirit has come back up on these devils, man. On the people. We literally living in 2nd Ezra, the 15th, the 16th chapter, man. Matter of fact, let me get a precept from there. So I get 2nd Ezra chapter 15 and verse 4. I started at 14. It says, "Woe to the world and them that dwell therein, for the sword and their destruction draweth nigh. And one people shall stand up and fight against another, and swords in their hands. For there shall be sedition among men, and invading one another. They shall not regard their kings nor princes, and the course of their actions shall stand in their power. A man shall desire to go into a city and shall not be able." And that's literally what's happening, and this is only DC, man. Of course it's going to spread because, you have, thousands, of homeless people in these different cities, man, like in Chicago and, San Francisco, shit here in Atlanta, so it's going to spread, And it says, for because their pride, the cities, so like, let me read that 17th verse again. A man shall desire to go into a city and shall not be able. You see? And that's literally, what's happening, man. So if Trump is willing to do that, to homeless people, imagine, what he would do to people who actually own homes or, live in, those metro city areas, because there's no order. There's no order. He basically said, hey, do whatever the hell you want to do with them, man. That goes to show you the devil that this guy really is, man. All right. Matter of fact, for second edification, let me look this up on ChatGPT. It says in biblical times, there wasn't the same concept of homelessness that we have today. People without shelter in an unurbanized society, but that it says people without shelter in an unurbanized society, but there were the poor, landless, and vulnerable, and Scripture has a lot to say about how they were treated. The Israelite law, so our law, man, you so-called blacks, Latinos, and Native Americans, require protection for the poor and landless. You see? So that's totally opposite of what, Esau is doing right now. It says the Torah commanded generosity towards the ger, foreign/sojourner, the orphan, and the widow groups often without land or protection. You see, so it was a law, for the people that was in need, man. And that's why the Lord is, when you read Isaiah, the second chapter, the Lord's going to, reestablish his law, within the earth, which is righteousness, because, Esau has totally done away with, how, the people should be living. It says Leviticus 19, verse 9 to 10, and Deuteronomy 24, 19 through 22 required landowners to leave part of their harvest for the poor and the stranger to glean. You see, so the landowners was required to leave, food, fruit, on trees, for the homeless, man, for the people that was in need, It says this meant even if someone had no property, they could still gather food. You see? So we're going to go back to that, man. Even within the kingdom, it won't be no homelessness, man. All right? But just for sake of edification, it is a law for, people that's homeless, man. But look, when we go to our cities, to these big metro cities, and you see, the homeless people, on drugs, panhandling, no jobs, clothes, filthy, got a stink to them. That's a product of the so-called white man. Debt laws, Deuteronomy 15, and the year of Jubilee, Leviticus 25, were meant to prevent permanent poverty or landlessness by restoring property and forgiving debts every 50 years. You see, so the hospitality is even within us as a people, man. And that's why. Matter of fact, that's pretty much it. When I wanted to get on that, I close on this verse, this precept. I think it's it. Yep, Proverbs 29:2. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the people wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. And that's exactly what's going on, man. The people are mourning, to where it's causing, riots and protests, and it's going to do nothing but increase, as we continue to go into these latter days, of the world ending, man, So, Lord willing, this lesson was edifying. I'm going to go ahead and close up, by giving all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, by Hashem Yahweh Shai, by Hashem Rakakwadash, double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. And until the next time, Shalom.